Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything is Gay, even the stray stuff. I'm John McDonald, along here with my fabulous co host, Magnus. And I would like to personally invite you to an exclusive candlelit supper happening in the UK. And it's happening at this wonderful lady's house called Hyacinth Bouquet. It's spelled strangely, but I guess I appreciate the affectation. Hello, Magnus.
Hello. And unlike Hyacinth's startled and panicky guests, I won't be coming up with a completely random excuse or occasion, which unfortunately just clashes with your supper, sir. I
Well,
won't be doing that.
she really only has the one, uneasy guest, and really that's just Elizabeth. And for some reason, Hyacinth just makes Elizabeth uneasy. I can't imagine why. She would be a delightful neighbor to have.
Oh, yes, she's certainly not the terror of the community. No, no, not by any stretch of the imagination.
Not at all. I actually think that as a gay person, and this is probably part of why this show is done so well, I was actually shocked by how well it's done. Is because really Hyacinth Bouquet, right down to how she pronounces her name and answers the telephone, there's something very drag about what Patricia Rutledge did to her, and I guess I'm not surprised by that because a lot of this cast had musical theater background, and so
Mm,
there's something very drag queen about Bouquet, lady of the house speaking, but her last name is actually the word bucket, but she pronounces it bouquet. There's something very drag about this lead,
mm.
which makes sense as to why she's one of the most famous BBC characters of all time. Um, I was impressed about all the stats I learned about the show for this episode. Things that
Mm,
I didn't know. Also, Keeping Up Appearances only ran for 44 episodes, and it's
mm.
still one of the top. It actually, I'll tell you this in a moment after you kind of. So we're doing this for your birthday month. Your first thing was I want to talk about Keeping Up Appearances. So let's start with that, and then I'll give you some stats about it that I found really cool.
Mm. Um, oh, sorry, you wanted me to talk about it for a little bit.
Yeah, like this is something we both
Mm,
cherish, but you were like, I'm
yes.
gonna talk about this for my birthday month, so
Ah,
the microphone is yours.
oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Um, so yes, Keep Up Appearances. It's one remained one of my favorite British comedies. Ever since I first discovered it when I was a young teenager, and I was just absolutely captivated by this incredibly larger than life personality that just seemed to jump out of the TV. The the thing is, she seems so ridiculously real in every facet of herself, even though she's completely over the top, completely barmy, but in a wonderfully eccentric way. Um, so completely real, and it's tricky to get a TV character that actually feels in that way, that are not one dimensional and such. Um, so she's absolutely fantastic. The supporting cast do an absolutely fantastic job, both enhancing her presence through their actions and yet also undermining her at the same time. Richard really did serve as the perfect foil to Hyacinth, and it might not have worked so well if Richard was not who he was within the show. And then you have all the rest of the marvelous supporting cast. The and the other great thing is the fact that even though Hyacinth is who she is, I don't think you ever feel that anyone else is ever completely overshadowed by her, and you recognize who they are straight away. Um, Even if they are in only a few episodes and such, or if they are in loads of episodes, you still recognize who they are and what their role is within the story. Um, I do see why it's such a favorite for quite a few members of the community. Not just because of like the drag star sort of energy that you get, also because of the fact that Hyacinth is very true to herself. Like, she has pretensions above her station, but she is who she is and she loves who she is. And underneath, like, all the dominating parts of her, there is, like, a heart to her. There's a real kindness in what she does. She's just, she just doesn't see, like, how overbearing she can be. And I
Yeah.
think that really shines through. It's n You can't really hate Hyacinth at all.
Yeah,
Not at
it's
all.
it's too
Mm.
much of a farce to really hate her. Like
Mm,
she's too much of a fool to be like so domineering that she can't find anything redemptive. I'd agree with that.
mm. Um, and I feel it's strange. She's quite a motherly figure in a way. I mean, you'd still be terrified if you met her in real life.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel that a lot of gays would quite happily call her mother. Ooh, and I was just wondering what would happen if we did a crossover between Hyacinth and the Golden Girls. Um, Stark Terror, I believe. Sophia, like, ending up like, oh my god, I'm just thinking about the possibilities of such a thing.
I think
Maybe I should do that next time.
she'd probably have the same reaction. So she'd probably get along best with Blanche because
Mm.
Blanche
Ooh.
has that same sort of upper class air delusion, even though Blanche is much more sex positive in the same way that Daisy is, which is part of why
Mm.
I like the show.
Oh no,
I think there's
Rose,
something,
not Daisy. Daisy was the other sister. Rose was
yeah,
the trollop.
Rose was having the sex, but Daisy was sex positive, and she was very much
Hmm.
in love and often wanted sex from her husband. And the running gag, they didn't
Sure.
have it. But I think there was something about Daisy that was particularly very like. Whereas Hyacinth was all about putting on the air and trying to be higher class than she actually was in status, Daisy was a very comfortable person. And you see it not just in the name, but how they like interact with their spouse and just the amount of love that Daisy has for Onslow, even though he's supposed to be kind of the slob of the series. Um, there's something very sex positive about Daisy, where she kept trying to attract her husband,
Mm.
that really resonated with me even as a younger person.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, so I can see what you mean. I do apologize. I can totally get where your side of things at now is with that.
yeah.
Um, but oh, maybe I should write that. Maybe I should do a fan crossover comic and just put it out there as a special tribute to both series at some point.
I mean,
Hmm.
Hyacinth did at one point meet Mr. Blobby, which for us in America, we don't really have a connection to because we didn't have a Blobby. We had Barney, but he wasn't really a crossover guy. But
Hmm.
Hyacinth Bouquet did technically meet Mr. Blobby at some point. So
I don't honestly understand why Hyacinth would ever let that in her house. Um, all I
I,
can think is that she
I'm,
thought it was a lord or
yeah,
something.
I'm going by what Wikipedia has told me. So I don't know for sure. Um,
I mm, yes, I've seen the scene, I just don't understand the logic in Hyacinth's mind.
all right. So I would love to
Mm,
start off kind of the interesting things I know about the series with a
yes.
question. I want to see if you can actually
Ooh,
guess this.
okay.
So we were talking about Rose, who is one of the Bucket daughters. The actress that played Rose originated a very famous role in an Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. Do you know what role in what musical?
Was it
Uh,
Cat?
it was not Cats, but
Oh,
that is a good
crikey.
guess.
Was it Phantom?
It was Phantom. So,
Wait,
no,
is
so
she
Mary Miller, who played the second
mm,
Rose,
yeah.
originated the role of Madame Giry in Phantom. Uh,
Wow.
yeah. So, of all of the things that, of all of the roles, especially that surround musical theater surrounding the cast, I thought that was fairly interesting that um, one of the longer term cast members had originated a very famous role on Broadway and the West End.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And that is quite ah, honestly didn't know that, but I can see what you mean because a lot of them did come across as having like a strong theatrical leaning. And it does make me think if that does add to the sort of campness of this series because of the fact that everyone's sort of approaching it almost like it's a larger than life play at times.
Yeah. And you kind of get that from musical theater that's comedy especially. You definitely get that. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah.
What I found quite funny rewatching this series some years later on and such. You mentioned about the second actress that played Rose. The first actress that played her, Shirley, was it? I think it's Shirley Stelfox. I might be getting her name
Stillfox,
wrong.
yes, I don't know. It is Shirley
She
Stillfox. That yeah, she was there for the first series of it. But yeah,
she she put across that she very much like established Rose's um sexual energy, her promiscuity and stuff like that. What was funny is one of her later roles, she was in a soap called Emmerdale here in the UK. She played a moody conservative busybody. So she sort of did a 180 on her character from Rose to someone that was pretty much completely the opposite. Um, and it was just startling because when I rewatched it, was thinking to myself, I recognize your face. Where have I seen you? And
what
then
have I seen you from? Yes.
when the penny dropped, good God. uh,
No,
yes.
so yeah.
Yeah, sorry, you're going to say.
No, so there were so this was on BBC One from 90 to 95. So it's five series and five seasons for us here in America. 44 episodes, four of which were Christmas specials. The production ended because Rutledge decided to go out on top. She didn't hate playing Hyacinth, but she didn't want to just be known as Hyacinth. Ironically, this is the role she's most known for. Every time I saw her in something else, like in Hetty Winthrop Investigates or something like that,
Mm,
I always thought of her as Hyacinth. But she had some really cool creds to her name, like she was in Candide, which is
mm.
one of my favorite Kristen Chenoweth covers of Glitter and Be Gay. I would like you to guess. There was a poll in 2001 taken of the 100 greatest TV characters of all time. I would like you to guess the rank that Hyacinth Bouquet got in this
Mm.
list of 100 greatest TV characters.
Is it top 10?
It is not top 10.
Ah, curses. Okay. I will say number 30.
No. So Hyacinth was ranked 52. But that's
Okay.
still fairly remarkable for a series that ended in 1995 because the poll was taken in 2001.
True,
And
true.
this is actually Keeping Up Appearances is actually, at least by 2016 standards, it's the most exported television program from the BBC ever. Um, by February 2016, it had been sold nearly 1,000 times to overseas broadcasters, and there's like 10 countries that are specifically listed on the Wikipedia page as having big fan bases for this show. So there's
Mm,
actually something about this show that is very special. It is very much almost every country has sort of this unofficial social class system, and watching Hyacinth trying to climb it over and over again and just fail, but not fail
mm,
so hard that you feel bad for her, is just something people really related to. And
mm,
Patricia Routledge and Clyde Swift really were at the center of that in a lot of ways.
mm. I'm not surprised. When you get down to it, you talk about class divides and social climbing and such. They're quite universal themes when you think about it for quite a few different societies. So you can really understand where she's coming from when you watch the show and you watch all of her various little schemes and things that she's coming up with to try and impress, wow, and also get respect, I think, from those that she views as socially inferior to herself. I wonder as well, though, if it is because the show is so quintessentially British as well, that it makes it interesting viewing for people overseas. Um, but there is such a there for some reason there is a lot of people that are quite I believe the word is British files, Britophiles,
Anglophiles. I think Anglophiles would be,
Anglophiles. Mm.
yeah, because it would be Anglo-Saxon, so it'd be Anglophiles, I want to say.
Uh,
I guess
mm.
Britphiles would also work. Um, there's something interesting about this show where it's not quite a fish out of water tale. It's much closer to what we experienced with Are You Being Served more than like Vicar of Dibley. I feel like as far as British sitcom goes, this is a very classic British sitcom. Part of why Patricia Rutledge left too, she said in an interview, is that she felt in the later seasons they were rehashing things they'd already done. And so
Mm.
it's this interesting thing where it was very popular, and I find it's so endlessly quotable. If you go to like Etsy, you can find
Yes.
people that have like coffee mugs with Royal Doulton with hand painted periwinkles on it, and you can easily still pick up things from the show as merchandise done by fans. Um, there is one person in particular on Instagram that shares a love affair of just sending me messages where they just send me Sheridan in like all
Mm.
capital letters every now and then, which I very appreciate it. I do eventually want to talk
Mm.
about her obviously gay son Sheridan, who really
Mm.
she does not seem to understand is a gay son. I think that's also part of the attraction of the show is that kind of
Mm.
willful misunderstanding she does with Elizabeth and Emmett and her husband about Sheridan, who she has an overly familiar psychic bond with. There's nothing gayer than a British guy that loves his mother. I don't think so.
Oh, oh, indeed. Actually, maybe I should touch upon one thing that you were mentioning before I forget about it.
Sure.
You're saying about the show ending and such.
Yeah.
Um, so I actually was visiting some friends over the weekend, and they're quite ardent Keeper of Appearances fans, and they knew a bit more about the end of the show than I'd actually previously known myself. Um, from what it turns out, so Keeper of Appearances was meant to have another whole season that was planned and commissioned by the BBC. Um, but what happened was that thing of Patricia Rutledge not being dissatisfied with the fact that she felt things were going around in circles a bit.
Yeah.
Um, Apparently, she had spoken to the writer of the series that she did feel that they were repeating old ground. There was the same thing every week. She actually wanted some form of character development to happen for Hyacinth, or at the very least to see some sort of change to the status quo, which had just seemed to which just seemed to have existed for the family for quite some years at that point. She wanted to see something different happen. The writer had apparently turned around and said, "No, I've got a whole idea for the next season. Lots of great storylines, but nothing like that is going to happen. It's going to stay a sitcom." The both sides, the writer and Patricia, were had their own viewpoints, and sadly, there was no meeting of the minds. So that is partly why the show came to an end.
Yeah.
Patricia just didn't want to move forward past her, which was a real shame. My friend made a comment about how he would have loved to have seen Hyacinth actually host a candlelight supper for once to sort of finish off the season once and for all. Um, and I really like the idea, and I'm sad that there wasn't more of a formal ending to the show like that.
So apparently the introduction, the opening credits are actually supposed to be her preparing for it. So that's maybe why we only get that close, is the opening of the show. But it's also interesting in that the guy that created the show, Roy Clark, would
Mm,
not show up to set like writers were supposed to do for TV. And they actually had to hire a script editor to talk between him and the director, whose name was Snowed. And that was also part of the tension on set is that Clark would write the episodes and then would never show up, or he would rarely show up to set for rewrites, which is kind of
That's
interesting because this is
interesting.
the first time I've
Mm.
heard of like bumpy backstage antics on a BBC show expressly.
That's really interesting. I don't know enough about it to make
Yeah.
any conclusions, but I do wonder whether it was maybe that was the how writers were back then. Like, my job is to write the script and send it off, and it's your job to sort of film it, make it work, etc. That doesn't mean I have to have any interaction with the actors playing it, etc. I don't know if that was maybe the how they did things back then.
I'm not sure either.
Hmm.
So TV writing, it goes in waves where TV
Mm.
writers, I mean, it's different now because it's all streaming. It's barely ever on cable anymore. But TV writing used to go in waves of they wanted the writers very involved, so they'd always be on set, and then not involved at all, so the writers' room was never on set except for rewrite. So it's one of those things. The other part of this is that, especially in the later seasons where there's a lot of like stuff happening on the boat or with the major, Patricia Rutledge does a lot of physical comedy in the show in the later
Mm.
seasons. I can imagine after like 2 or 3 years of being tossed into the water or, like, having other things like that happen, like, that can take a toll on the body, so
Mm.
I can imagine if Patricia Rutledge wasn't signing like, she never has ill will to say about the character. So she loved playing Hyacinth, she just didn't wanna just be known as Hyacinth. Um,
Mm.
but it's also just I can imagine the toll that takes on the body to have to do that kind of pratfall over and over again. I will say, I don't know if your friends told you about this, but there was going to be a spinoff to Keeping Up Appearances. It just
Ooh,
never
I
got made.
I didn't know about this. What was it?
So before Jeffrey Hughes passed, and Jeffrey Hughes played Onslow, I think he passed.
Some
Onslow
years
was
ago.
Yeah, so Onslow was supposed to get like a radio program about men of the North or whatever. And so it was actually going to be an Onslow focused like radio program where he was kind of the center of this spinoff of it. They did make a spinoff called Young Hyacinth that I want to talk about later. That did get made, and it's not really a spinoff. It's like a prequel movie thing. Um,
Mm.
but it does feature her dad, Daddy, as it is, Father Bouquet, I guess.
Yes.
But by the time they recorded that, of course, quite a few of the main cast had already passed away, so they probably didn't even see it. But all the people
Yeah.
that were involved on the show generally seem to have had a very good time doing it. I can just imagine the kind of toll it took on Patricia Rutledge to have all those pratfalls in the later season falling in
Mm.
the water and whatnot.
Mm. Yes, yes, indeed. But it was those great set pieces, those memorable episodes that really made the show. Be it the "Let's go yachting" episode when it turned out there was just this little boat on on the canal, or the Garden King episode where they hosted the first um, indoor outdoor barbecue with a full on jungle and such.
I would enjoy that
Um,
very much. She would have liked Emily Gilmore. Hyacinth Bouquet would have liked Emily Gilmore, I feel like. I don't know if Emily would have liked her, but I feel like they would have done well together.
hmm, perhaps maybe. Hey, so
Yeah.
yes, I think I think there were so many parts to this series that worked really well together. Patricia Rutledge was obviously as Hyacinth, the linchpin in the entire affair and such. Um, but what was the other thing was the fact that all the characters tended to react differently to Hyacinth. I don't think there was anyone that had the same sort of reaction to her antics. Um, Richard was sort of like beaten down, tolerance to it, reluctantly getting involved in her schemes. Um,
Often
re-
almost
re-
going to jail. I remember the episode where she gave him a camera so when he was retiring, he could take pictures of birds, and the cops definitely misinterpreted that as him doing other things. Like every scheme she
mm,
had that involved him ended up making him somehow look like a perv almost all the time. And I find that like not only did she try to get like I don't know if it was like a knighthood or like a lordship for him after he retired, but like she definitely always kind of made Richard look like a perv, even though he was just doing his best to like survive retirement. It was one of the season opener where like just the vision of his life retiring with Hyacinth and his reaction on his face, realizing how much time he's going to spend with his wife. Um, what's interesting is that doesn't make me uncomfortable. Usually, the "take my wife, please" jokes like really make me uncomfortable because it's like definitely a relic from an earlier time. But like the Richard's face and what we know about Hyacinth is not that she's a bad wife. It's just that you're not retiring. It's going to be an exhausting life with her trying to keep
yeah.
up with someone who just is still trying to climb a social ladder. And in Britain, that
Mm,
social caste system is so much more pronounced in ways than it is necessarily here in America. Um,
mm.
so that's like a real thing people do. This was actually one of the favorite series of the Queen at the time. She loved keeping up appearances. Like her and the queens and the queen in training at the time both loved keeping up appearances, which apparently no one ever told Patricia Rutledge, but the queens loved it. The royal family loved keeping up appearances, apparently. So
Um, oh, bless. I didn't know that, but I can totally understand and see where their love for this show comes from. Um, and yes, to go back to it again, so you had um, Richard's reluctant involvement in the schemes. Um, Next door neighbor Elizabeth was the same, sort of reluctance, but it was coming from more of a thing of like she saw beneath like Hyacinth's bluster that she was kind and was a friend
yeah,
to Elizabeth. Um,
she was
like
also good. Oh no, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say I get the feeling that Hyacinth wasn't doing it just to sort of try and impress someone. She actually did consider Elizabeth a friend. And she actually said it, I think, a couple of times, like, you know, Elizabeth's my friend, and I won't let her house prices degrade even further. That was when she thought that her brother Emmett was a strange man that Elizabeth was having over for an affair or something.
Scandal. I mean, I would have had an affair with David Griffin in that kind of younger phase. Sure, yeah, I'm not mad about that. Uh, So Josephine Tewson actually a couple interesting things about Elizabeth Warden, who Josephine Tewson played. Josephine Tewson was a TV actress. She was actually kind of known for these characters. I loved the recurring kind of tick that she had whenever Hyacinth would hand her china and she would shake it so hard that it could potentially fall and break. And that nervous tick only happened around Hyacinth. And that was something that you kind of have to be classically trained to do. It's something you have to like really understand. Um, so Josephine Tewson really came from this, honestly, from TV, which was really cool. Also, Elizabeth Warden had a daughter in college, a daughter who we never saw. That was also like Sheridan was the kid we never saw. Um, Elizabeth's daughter was actually in college where Sheridan only went to a polytechnic. And so anytime Elizabeth wanted to burst Hyacinth's balloon, she actually had a lot more power because in social caste system, Elizabeth's daughter was higher than Sheridan. So there were a couple times where she actually was able to burst Hyacinth's bubble with the power Hyacinth thought they had in the relationship, which is really neat that
Mm,
she had that power. She just chose not
mm.
to use it 90% of the time.
Indeed, and I mean, technically, a lot of the cast if they really wanted to, they could have like brought Hyacinth down a peg or two through different means. Um, like Richard who could have refused to take part in her schemes. What you said about Elizabeth, her family could have actively caused a ruckus, but they weren't doing that. They were just being themselves. They were just there.
Just living their
Um,
life, and that's one of my favorite things too, is the Bucket family home, not Hyacinth, but Daisy and Anzo's home, that is kind of that lower class. They are so comfortable with who they are, and that Cortina, I think it was a Cortina was the car they had, and every time Hyacinth visited their house and the dog in the rusted out car, like, popped out, always scared her, no matter how many times, and she was always startled by that dog, and the dog just wanted to be friends. I loved reoccurring jokes like that every time they showed up. One of my favorite episodes actually is the first time we meet them, which is the first time we meet the vicar, which is the second episode. Michael Gittens, or Jeremy Gittens as Michael, is, by the way, forever known as the handsome vicar. Um, the one
oh
where
no,
they
sir.
show up, it's like it's the second episode of the series, and Rose almost runs away with the vicar, and Daisy and Onslow show up, and just the sound of their cortina, like, on the road where Hyacinth lives, and her reaction to them being there, um, hilarious every single time, just hilarious.
Mm, indeed, and again, the vicar's wife was another character that could undermine Hyacinth when she wanted to. The famous episode where Hyacinth volunteered to help clean at the church and was given toilet duty because she volunteered too eagerly, shall we say, put her hand up too quickly for latrine duty. Um, that was the episode where Rose was volunteering as well and was climbing up the ladder, and shall we say, she wasn't wearing a long enough skirt, so she ended up showing everyone a bit too much, much to Hyacinth's terror.
That's also why I don't climb up ladders, because I never know what skirt length to wear when I'm on a ladder.
Mm. So the vicar is actually the dishy vicar. He wasn't a handsome vicar. They always described him as the dishy vicar, and it's strange. He didn't seem to be going out of his way to attract the ladies, even though all the ladies liked him. Um, but there seemed to be almost like some untold backstory because his wife seemed to always have this weird thought in her head that the ladies were going to be too friendly with the vicar. So it does raise some interesting questions of what happened with the vicar before the series. Like he has some sort of past.
I also wonder, because I'm not sure. I think I don't know if the dishy slash handsome vicar is like a recurring theme in British sitcoms. Obviously, in Dairy Girls, the priest is rather hot. And there was one other one I had on the tip of my head, and I was trying to think. Is the dishy vicar like sort of a trope in British sitcom, like having
Um,
a religious figure that's also very handsome?
no, not at all, really. Um, no, I can't think of any. I'm thinking back to other ones like Dad's Army, other times in Keeper appearances because they did have another priest every now and again pop up. Um, just thinking of all of them, I don't know. I think hmm, it might be a slight trope in some circumstances. You kind of had that in Grantchester because the crime-solving vicar was quite dishy.
Oh
Um,
yes, that's what I was trying to think of Grantchester. That's what it was.
but I think no, I think generally not so much. It's actually interesting that a series like Keeper Appearances kind of added that extra element of, dare I say, sex appeal with the vicar, but it was quite understated. He never. It was always Rose that was calling him the dishy vicar. The vicar himself never really pushed himself forward in that sense.
Yeah, and Rose, for all of her predilections for men, it never felt like they were making fun of her so much. I feel like Daisy tried to keep her in check, but it never felt like they were judging Rose for being guy crazy. There's something
Mm,
about this Rose, in particular, as opposed to Rose and the Golden Girls, where like this Rose was not given permission to be promiscuous, but it's very much like people didn't people didn't get down on her for just being who she was. There were certain taboos that she was crossing, but it never felt like the show was mean spirited and slut shamey about her. And it was also
mm,
very kind to Daddy. I don't like I don't I don't think they gave him I think they may have called him like the colonel or something in it. I can't remember. But the dad character who was obviously going through like dementia or whatever from being in the war. Several episodes are about finding him when he's escaped from the home, but it never
mm.
felt so mean-spirited in its joking. Like it always felt that it was this playful thing where it was never going to be a serious issue that Hyacinth was just blowing it out of proportion again. It really did feel like it was a family that cared about each other, even if they came about it from very different angles.
Yes. No, I totally agree with that. Yes, Daddy sadly was very much declining. So was getting up to all sorts of antics. There were a couple episodes where he went walking around nude, another couple where he was pinching women's bottoms, etc. It was all in a way, I would say that that was slightly bit more of a trope for British comedies, the sort of like naughty old man sort of
Yeah,
thing,
we
which
saw it on
again was
Grace Brothers is
mm,
one place where we particularly saw that. Yeah,
mm. We had that a little bit in Dad's Army with like some of the antics of the older members of the platoon. It wasn't really a huge thing. It was seen a couple of times. Um, but in general, again, he was a great foil to Hyacinth. And as much as she tried to portray her daddy as like a decorated war hero and such, and that he achieved, had a great mind, that's what she said. Um, it was clear that she was blowing things out of proportion again and painting it in her own perspective.
so we've talked a little bit about Daisy Bouquet, who probably would just go by Daisy Bucket and would say Hyacinth Bucket to annoy her sister. But they do have an older sister that we only met um, in the last season of the series. She has a brief cameo she's uncredited for, but Violet Bouquet or Bucket, the one that Hyacinth talked to on the phone throughout the first four series. Violet actually makes physical appearances in the last season, which is really neat. So, do you want to start with Violet? I think that's where we were going, right?
Mm. So yes, Violet is a wonderful contrast. That was the thing with this series. It gave like all sorts of different angles to the situation with Hyacinth. Like you've got her poorer sisters, Daisy and Rose, and how she was interacting with them, and at times like just gently ignored or just tried to excuse away in the passing when she was talking to other people. But then you had Violet, who was the opposite, that was quite rich. Um, Her facilities, swimming
Yeah,
pool,
she
room for a
had a
pony.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
She had room for a swimming pool and a pony.
Yes. Hyacinth liked to say that on the phone a lot. She would tell other people that her sister was calling. She also had a Mercedes, lest we forget that Violet had a Mercedes, which was a big to do for Hyacinth.
Indeed. Um, so she would big up Violet, but in actuality, Violet and her husband Bruce were just as eccentric as the rest of the family. Um, and later on, they started to include Violet more, as you say, and in person a few times. And while Violet was like richer and of a higher social standing than Hyacinth was, she was never ashamed of Rose or Daisy. There was a memorable scene where Violet was taking them somewhere, and Daisy voiced her concern about Hyacinth's opinion, and Violet said, "No, it's perfectly fine. Come on." So she didn't give two hoots about social standing in that regard, which was a very interesting take to see.
I think it probably helps that Violet's husband, Bruce, was introduced in the series as a, and I'm going to quote the Wikipedia page, a cross dressing, equestrian loving turf accountant husband. So one of the running gags, besides never meeting Sheridan, her probably queer son, who lived with his lover Tarquin, I think, is
Mm,
how Hyacinth describes Violet's home, and then kind of shrugs off the eccentricities of Violet's husband Bruce, who keeps her
mm,
comfortable. Um, and again, this is a thing where it could have come across very mean, but it has aged. It still ages in a way where it's funny and it doesn't seem so incredibly derogatory in both the
mm,
way the audience laughs and the way it's delivered. Um, it's very refreshing to like hear it and like not cringe immediately, because sometimes in stuff that's a little older, like it's yeah. But here it's about the eccentricity of wealth and how many blinders Hyacinth has on. So it's never made to feel icky, really. So yeah.
no, it's made to come across as like they have the status and money, so of course they're going to be a little odd in their own way, and that's why Hyacinth sort of like brushes it under the carpet. And she did that actually for quite a few other acquaintances as well. Um, the Major was quite a randy old goat when you think about it. He was actually like tried to get with Hyacinth a couple of times with his schemes. But because he was a major, Hyacinth was willing to put up with it so she could have him as a guest to her dining table. Um, and there was the memorable thing about the sea captain. She said she'd go and collect him from the railway station, and it turned out that he was a bit um, amorous in his attentions as well. But with a firm stiff upper lip, she shouldered on past all of these inconveniences, shall we say.
It's true. She tried so hard. Um, she also did not like being in a car with Richard. One of my other favorite gags is the mind the cow, Richard, in the field. The gag of these things that are
Mhm.
so far away.
Mm,
So I appreciated that her vigilance wasn't just something played for laughs. She also had like just vigilance about the world around her. It's actually kind of
mm,
nice that we go from her. She's still embarrassed by her family, but at the end of the series, final episode, the pageant, she actually ends up calling on her family to help save the pageant in her own hyacinthy way, which shows a lot of character growth, which was what Patricia Rutledge um, probably wanted for Hyacinth.
mm,
So it's really nice to see, probably in charting the series. What's nice too is that Richard and Onslow get along fairly well when they're allowed to interact. When
yes.
Hyacinth isn't getting in the way, Richard and Onslow really get along, which is unexpected because you're so trained to see brothers-in-law that either never see each other, so they know nothing about each other, or they hate each other for some reason. So when Richard and
Mm,
Onslow are on screen together, Clive and Jeffrey have this like magnetic friendship, which is really cool.
mm. And you saw in a few episodes where Onslow actually some of the only times that Onslow really went out of his way to do something that wasn't like um to do with betting or stuff like that. Something that was very activity based was he was concerned for Richard, so he would go to check up on him, tried to get him away from Hyacinth for a bit and such.
Yeah,
Um, so you did see that concern with him. And to briefly touch upon Onslow, um, it was confirmed through word of God with the producers and writers that Onslow is one of the actually the most intelligent characters in the series.
yeah,
Um, he's just bone idle. He never puts his intelligence to any sort of actual use because he's comfortable in who he is. He's always thinking like philosophical questions when he's in bed or reading something um, of interest and such. he he's completely laissez-faire about the world in general, which is actually quite polar opposite to Hyacinth when you think about it, because she was a little ignorant on a few key subjects, or she got wowed by certain things
yeah.
that Onslow probably would never have been taken in by.
I would call Onslow a proper lad. I would. Um, I find so one of the things I love about the series, I talked about Daisy and Onslow. A part of it is like I think Onslow's deep love for Daisy, he knew how to like keep her at bay a little bit, but it never felt like he was mistreating her or withholding sex for any purpose. Like it felt like there was a deep love between them. He just didn't want to do anything. He was just happy with his telly and his beer. He didn't need any of that. But when the occasion called for it, he was there and happy to be there. Um, I
Mm,
really enjoy. I can see why Onslow was the one chosen for the spinoff that never got made. Um,
mm,
I would have loved to have potentially seen a spinoff done with Emmett though, because Emmett's background in musicality and teaching probably could have gone some really cool places with David
mm,
Griffin as Emmett, who is one of the few main characters that starts out in series two. He's not in series one, he's added in series two in that wonderful, great miscommunication where Hyacinth is scandalized and then turns the corner instantly when she finds out he's a musician and is like, oh, I could get onto the stage. Um,
mm.
and
Um,
yeah,
what's hilarious is the fact that Patricia Rutledge is actually a very good singer, but she was able to portray Hyacinth as being ridiculously off key so well,
yeah.
which
Pat-
was just
Pat-
fantastic.
Patricia Rutledge was known as like a contra alto or something like that. Like she was an amazing singer. You
Mm.
can't do Candide without being an amazing singer, but like it's like finding out Tim Curry was Lancelot in Camelot. It's like what? But no, yeah, Patricia Rutledge doing off-key singing was was a great coup for the show. Um, but it
Mm.
was Emmett is probably one of my favorite neighbor side characters in BBC British, if not all sitcoms that I love. His catchphrase, "But she'll sing at me," is said with such fear that I think about it all the time.
Mm.
Uh, I think Emmett. I think Emmett's probably one of the best like divorced trying to move on with my life side characters because he never does get to on with his life because Hyacinth won't let him. But his relationship with Liz is really good. Like the way that they are both afraid of Hyacinth in different ways, and like Liz throws him on the fire occasionally to get away from Hyacinth for a little bit. It's
Mm.
really good comedy. It's like this. It's this very wonderfully not gentle but not abrasive comedy. It's very Vicar of Dibley in a way, and I
Mm.
think Emmett and Liz were two of the best neighbor characters probably in all of BBC history.
Mm. You see, I in a way, I partially liked it when the series ended because I noticed in the last few episodes that Emmett's interactions with Hyacinth were getting slightly more. mean and spiteful. Like, I think the character was starting to get driven so stir crazy that he was starting to take a few petty revenges against Hyacinth. And I think it was good that we sort of didn't see that build up over time. Because I wouldn't have enjoyed seeing Emmett go through a whole like mean arc to Hyacinth. I mean, it makes complete logical sense why he was doing it, but I think it would have taken away a little bit from the character if he had done so.
Yeah. Yeah, because the show did farce, but it didn't go into mean-spirited territory. It never went into King of Queens or even Simpsons territory. Like, but it was a farce. So you had an I Love Lucy sensibility to it, but it never felt like it was so against Hyacinth that she was never going to have a candlelight
Mm.
supper. It wasn't this wasn't like a Sisyphean morality tale or anything. Um,
In,
yeah.
ah, indeed. Mm. So, something I wanted to briefly mention, one of the themes that runs through the show, um, I think it's visually there, but it's never actually acknowledged, but the viewers can see it, is the fact there seems to almost be a theme where it's sort of like it's saying that happiness is like allowing yourself to be yourself, and it doesn't need money or status to make that happen. And what you see is almost like a sliding scale that the the members of the family that are the poorest in terms of material wealth are actually the happiest with their lives and like who they are and such. And as it creeps up to Hyacinth and Richard, and then goes further to Violet and Bruce, um, you see them being less happy because even though like Hyacinth's a bit balmy and Richard is the long-suffering husband, they are actually still very much in love with each other and have that relationship with one another where they do support one another, even if it's a bit misguided from Hyacinth's end, um, and long-suffering from Richard's. Whereas when you get to Violet and Bruce, like there was a whole episode of them having a violent argument, shouting match in the background and throwing things at each other, which Hyacinth was desperate to cover up with loud music. And it seems that it was going to put it might eventually have gone to divorce with them. They were deeply unhappy despite all their possessions and such. Um,
Yeah.
so
One
that's
of yeah.
an ongoing theme within the series.
One of the best episodes that isn't really it is funny because all of the 44 episodes have a lot of humor in them. The episode where Hyacinth thinks Richard has forgotten their anniversary is probably one of the best episodes of the series, and it showcases there are a couple episodes that really do showcase why Richard sticks around. Like, and it does have to do with his love for his wife, and even though she does drive him crazy, and they have a Chinese takeaway phone number apparently, where people keep interrupting their lives asking for the number 15 with extra mushu pork or something, which sounds delicious. Um, there is a deep love that Richard has for Hyacinth, and though it's never explicitly stated exactly what that is, there are episodes where you see that glimpse and that he's not just sticking around because that's what you did in a marriage then. Yes, he dreads retirement, but it's only because Hyacinth is an exhausting person. If she were just like half on the gas, it probably could have been much better. They probably could have like I can imagine nobody loves a Great British Baking Show more than Hyacinth Bouquet. I can imagine that if they like did a new version of this with Patricia Rutledge, there'd be a whole episode of her just trying out for like the Great British Baking Show or something like that. Actually, it would be Bake Off. We can't call it Bake Off in America because Pillsbury trademarked it, which is why it's called the Great British Baking Show here. But I can just imagine there is no show more perfect. Like, just imagine Hyacinth Bouquet meeting Mary Berry, the ultimate like cookery middle class making higher class like food for candles. Just imagine Hyacinth trying to meet Mary Berry, and it's the delight. It's the delight of everything, really.
Ah,
So the show
indeed.
always makes me hungry for Chinese food because every time someone calls, and they try to order Chinese food, and she gets so enraged that she just will not change her number. It's like one off from a Chinese shop.
Mm,
And she just will not change their number on their white slimline telephone, their private white slimline telephone. It's so good. It's so good.
indeed. And just a brief note, um, we were saying about changing things. Hyacinth always gets flustered when people pronounce bouquet wrong with the actual spelling. Like in the past, I always wondered why she never just bothered to change it. Because it is possible here in the UK to change your given name or your surname if needs be. But I wonder if it's never that even though she wanted to pronounce it differently, like she still loved her family to the extent that she didn't want to lose her surname. And that might have been why she never actually went forward with changing it,
I
but
like
she
it
just
as
kept
a
it.
I like it as a play on words with every member of the family being
Mm,
named after a flower. I think it's just funny personally, but also her family name is Walton, and we find out that in Young Hyacinth from
mm,
2016, which was written by Roy Clark, so it's
mm.
a prequel in the continuity. Um, Walton just doesn't. Also, when Richard says it was bouquet, it was bucket until I met you.
Yeah.
It's also it's just a really good. So this is where I think the kind of drag pantomime tradition of British sitcom makes it better. Because I think if it was Netflix streaming or if it was an American sitcom that tried to do this, they would have done that, and they would have rectified it as like a big like half season thing where they struggle with their last name. I actually like that it's just I like the pun of it's about flowers, it's about her being pretentious. I like that it's never like nobody tries to fix it.
Mm, yes.
But that's me
Um,
personally.
and indeed. Um, so you mentioned about young Hyacinth.
Yeah.
Now, a bit of background to that is, it was a one-off special that was commissioned by the BBC, um, I believe to celebrate one of the BBC's anniversaries. They went back to a couple of their shows and actually did like one-off remakes of or prequels for them. I believe Porridge might have been another one of the shows that got a one-off episode done of it as well. Um, and I believe there had been some clamoring for some time to see Hyacinth's early years. Um, and that's where this kind of came about, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think there was ever plans to make it more than a one-off. And I don't think there's any plans at the moment to do anything else with Keeping Up Appearances. I just don't know if they could, to be honest, because Patricia's um appearance as Hyacinth is so captivating in the mind. I don't know if another one would ever really take off at this moment.
I think if you did a Keeping Up Appearances, but it was a she's retired, and so they kept the set, but they moved Sheridan in. And so Sheridan has taken over her house, and we meet Sheridan and Tarquin, and it's this really like fabulously overtly queer, like British sitcom. And every now and then you hear Patricia Rutledge, like she records some stuff over the telephone or something. I think that could work because the whole untapped potential of is Sheridan queer, and then having an actual like British sitcom with pronounced queer characters like Sheridan and Tarquin doing like this amazing like who goes to a polytechnic school just for needlepoint classes? Like you can take sewing classes anywhere. But I think it would be lovely to do that. And I think we live
Mm,
in an era where that would be possible.
yes.
And of course, so two things I want to say about Young Hyacinth is that
Yeah.
one is that Josephine Tewson is still alive, so they could keep Liz next door, by the way.
Mm,
which would be super cool. And I think Judy Cornwell is still alive, actually, so they could have Daisy visit. So they have enough of the main cast left that they could probably make something happen. But I've always wanted to know what the vision was for Sheridan. I don't think they've ever like answered it in any of the books or the VHS specials or anything. But I always kind of wondered
mm.
about that.
Um, I think Sheridan's role was always to be a sort of recurring plot point slash um joke with
Yeah,
the show. He was a character, but then because he was an unseen character in the same style that Mrs. Mainwaring was from Dad's Army, um, his sort of like ghostly presence affected the cast and such, but I don't know if he was ever meant to be elevated beyond that. The one appearance that we had of him in the season was the back of his head in the taxi as he was driving off after a visit. Um, I, f- I honestly think that Hy- Sheridan is perhaps one of the only members of the cast that really knows how to work with his mother or to work around his mother
yeah,
because you rarely saw him like outfoxed on the telephone. He was always getting extra money from mummy and daddy, shall we say.
yeah.
Um, and it was rare that he was denied anything like that. So I do wonder if like he inherited quite a lot of Hyacinth's traits in a way. Um, being quite independently minded and such.
Yeah.
Um, and originally, when he went to college, he was actually doing something else. I forget what Richard said he was doing. Um, and then once he was away from home, then he got to be sort of out and free. There's sort of like
Yeah.
a bit of a coming out aspect to that, then, of leaving home and becoming true to yourself.
Yeah. There is something a little bit John Inman about Sheridan. Like you
Mm,
just get the sense from the glimpses of what you get is that John Inman and Sheridan would be pretty good soul buddies, if not more. I do love there is a British tradition of like queer but not queer characters, but it never felt like even keeping up appearances. Like I don't think and you can correct me if I'm wrong. It never feels mean spirited. Yes, it was slightly behind the times. Yes, there was more liberation that needed to happen, but especially in the sitcoms, because American sitcoms got so mean spirited about people that were other. Just British sitcoms always felt more refreshing because people that were other were never so denigrated that they felt not worthwhile. They always gave something the whole thing of Good Neighbors especially is the weird neighbors bring in the straight-laced ones into, like, their homesteading lifestyle over the course of the series, right? So,
mm,
like, that's
yeah.
how it feels to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong if there is a series I probably shouldn't
Uh,
watch, but, like,
mm,
Sheridan and John Inman from Are You Being Served, these very flamboyant, coded femme guys really do feel, even as side characters sometimes, more celebrated and accepted, even if it's not
mm.
completely, and obviously it could be better, but it never felt as mean spirited as American sitcoms, really.
No. Um, I feel that Sheridan as a background character was done in a way so they could have an LGBT character that that they could get away with having one that was without getting the backlash. That might sound mean to say, but sadly, that was the attitude back then.
Yeah,
Um, However, it was never portrayed as a mean thing.
yeah,
I think the worst aspect of it was the fact that they were being portrayed as having stereotypically gay pastimes, making their own curtains, fine furnishings, and such. However, it was never portrayed as anything negative, and I think the main point I would have to make of all of this is the fact is if Hyacinth had ever acknowledged it. I was gonna say found out. I think she knows in a way. She doesn't want to acknowledge it,
Richard
but
knows. Richard is like, "Yeah, do you wonder why your son never brings a girl home?"
he, he-
Richard knows.
he's
Richard knows his
he,
kid. He's like, "Yeah, do you know?"
yes, and he I think he's Richard's never put across that he's not accepting of it because like after I think after that episode was when he like a future one was when when Sheridan had come to visit. And so Richard had no problems with his son being gay. I think he was trying to like make his wife consciously aware of it. I think even though if like when Hyacinth would be consciously aware of it, I could never see Hyacinth disowning Sheridan. Um, I think she would just have ended up treating it like another one of her family's eccentricities, but would have loved him all the same.
I think
Um,
she probably would have treated him the way that she treated Liz. Because Liv is the one friend, neighbor of hers we meet. The other women on the street, she doesn't like very much. She calls them snobs, even though they're on kind of the same level as her. Like, Liz is the
mm,
only person she connects with as non snob. And I can imagine having a femme son for her is kind of the best of both worlds because, like, you can go antiquing with him and who else is going to appreciate Royal Doonton China like your femme son is? I mean, if we millennials had money and places for it, we would all have Royal Doonton China and we would have fancy tea parties. Like, I'm just imagining Sheridan hosting a backyard Alice in Wonderland themed like tea party for a birthday and it being just the most amazing like tea party you've ever seen and just Hyacinth is totally in control of it and it's incredible. And like that's the
mm.
spinoff I want. You can't call it still keeping up appearances because Josephine Towson is using that for the stage show that she did about her life, but you can like you could come up with a name for it. And I really if anybody wants to pay me to like make a script, I'll make a proof of concept. And we'll totally get this Sheridan and Tarquin Bowl on the tracks here because I'm all for it.
Ah, indeed. It would be no, I could see the appeal of it. I still value him as a background unseen character, but
Yeah.
mm, I love keep up appearances, so I would not hate some additions to the franchise.
Yeah. Well, and Keeping Up Appearances was the let's see if I can find it. Keeping Up Appearances was the 12th in that Britain's Best Sitcom list. It was ranked number 12. And again, it is the most exported television program ever in BBC's history. So it's
Hmm.
very important. Um,
Yes.
I
Ah.
have one more thing that I think
Ooh, go
that
ahead.
is important to talk about. So, my kind of favorite thing about Young Hyacinth is fairly good. It was
Hmm.
written by Roy Clark, who wrote the original series, so there's a lot of good continuity. It's about Hyacinth really seeing what the upper class is like and why she admires it. It gives a lot of background information to why she talks about her father as a war hero. But most importantly, the actor that plays Hyacinth's dad, who they still call Daddy, is played by Mark Addy. And Mark
Hmm.
Addy is one of those rare British sitcom stars that kind of came across. He's the heavier set guy in The Full Monty. He was in A Knight's Tale. He had his own sitcom called Still Standing, which was actually pretty good. He was in Jack Frost, not the horror movie Jack Frost, but the rom com Jack Frost. He was in the Guy Pearce version of The Time Machine. I just want to let you all know I was very excited to see Mark Addy as the dad in Young Hyacinth. Carrie Howard was really good as Hyacinth, but for me it was really all about Mark Addy. I'm not going to lie about that.
Ah. Well, this is the thing I mentioned before that I loved seeing that actress Shirley Fox reminding like seeing her again in something else, and then it was sort of you revisited Keep Her Appearances and got reminded of her other roles and such.
Yeah.
And I feel that it is the sort of sitcom you can revisit and not just enjoy it for watching the episodes again, but also seeing these actors in this moment in time in these great iconic roles. Um, and we've mentioned this with the Golden Girls before, about timelessness, and I feel that Keep Up Appearances is another one of those timeless shows that you can rewatch and not feel it's too dated that you can't enjoy it.
It's true. Yeah, it stands there with as time goes by where it feels
Mm,
older, but that doesn't detract from what it is.
no.
I actually like Keeping Up Appearances better because even in its cringier moments, it's not quite as cringy. Like American sitcoms are so mean spirited in so many ways,
Mm,
and something about shows like Keeping Up Appearances really don't hurt as much, even when they're not quite as advanced as where we are as a society.
mm,
Um, and there's some ways in which talking about creating especially queer characters or coded characters like Sheridan, who's never out as queer but has queer femme tendencies. It's actually a really interesting part of the conversation about how you build a character and what's important for you in a character. So for me as a
mm,
writer, Keeping Up Appearances is a great moment in time to learn to talk about a caste system, to learn to talk about things unsaid and things agreed upon but never talked about. And I just it's such a special show. It's also really cool because several of the actors have also been on big pop culture vanguards of the BBC, like Doctor Who, and so you see them
mm,
there, and then you can travel to other things they've done. Patricia Rutledge is a great way to get into musical theater. Like I said, Mary Millar was the original Madame Giry in Phantom of the Opera, and it's such a cool way to get into something that can lead into other things that are very satisfying in a lot of ways. So yeah,
mm.
it's Keeping Appearances. It's a really good it's a good laugh and it's a laugh that doesn't hurt. And I think that's what
Yeah.
by the way, only 44 episodes. I have 45 if you
Mm,
count like the children in need and the extra stuff like things with interviews with the books. So you could say 45 if you count all extra. But there's only 44 episodes of the show.
mm.
It's quite a thing to create something that lasts as long as it has and people are still quoting it, but it's only got 44, 45 episodes of content, but it's still
Hmm.
such a big to do.
Um, to to be fair, it's almost feels akin to Faulty Towers and Mr. Bean then, that it's a show that feels like they had a lot more episodes. Ended up not no, it wasn't anything like that at all. Didn't have that many more episodes, but then feels that they did more than like they did more with the concept and such than what was a lot the episodes that were actually allotted to them. And has kept
Yeah.
their relevancy and their knowledge in the public mind over the years.
I mean, to
Um,
be honest, Are You Being Served is probably 3 series too long, to be honest with you. Like,
mm,
if you took out the really good
yeah,
episodes, the one that people watch over again, there's probably that
yeah.
amount of content in Are You Being Served. As much as I love Are You Being Served, and it was my first foray into British sitcoms, feels longer than it should be, and Keeping Up Appearances feels about as much. And I'm also kind of glad they ended when it did because, like Patricia Rutledge, you can start to see some things being recycled. I will say they also do subtle jokes really well. My favorite subtle joke of Keeping Up Appearances, and this is kind of going to be my outro, so that you get time to do an outro for this, the Halloween episode where all of the women are like dressed as Columbia or the Statue of Liberty because that's the only costume people can find for the costume ball. So the end of the episode is Patricia Rutledge dressed as like Columbia getting
Mhm.
on a bus with Richard, and she absolutely hates she's wearing the same costume as everyone else. Subtle joke, solid joke, love it. Cut print wrap, you know what I mean?
Yes, and the way that, her line as well, "Let's go, Richard. I will not I will not be seen with these pretenders to my throne." And
It's
she
so
marches off.
good. It's so gay. It's so gay. Like she's really a drag queen. Like who but a drag queen would say that as they get on a public transit bus? Like let's be real.
I would actually respect if a drag queen referenced Hyacinth in some way on Drag Race at some point. if I was on the judging panel, yeah, I would get a number 10 just so I could raise it up to
The children don't even know. Hopefully, the children will listen to this and be like, "Yeah, I'm gonna check that out. My mom said it was kind of cool." And they'll like really they'll go for it. That's always kind of the hope with these. But yeah, I was so happy that you picked Keeping Up Appearances for your birthday
Mm,
month. You're turning
uh,
21 all over again. It's such a
y
cherished
uh,
time.
Eternal 21. Almost sounds like a book title, doesn't it?
Yes.
Um, um, I'm really glad though that we picked this subject. I know I put it forward, but it's a team effort to agree on a subject at the end of the day. Um, but I think it's quite clear to see why I put this one forward and why we want to talk about it. Keep Up Appearances is a British camp classic. It's something that everyone I think can enjoy. Um, and for the members of the community, it's a show with a lot of like thought to it and a lot of fond memories as well. The over the top characters, the great situations. Um, I mean, again, at the end of the day, Hyacinth just completely steals every scene she's in. Um, but at the end of the day, she's just endearing. Like she never gets old to watch, never outstays her welcome. Um, she's just fantastic, and there's a reason why I return to watching this every now and again, and why now that I brought up the idea of doing a Keeping Up Appearances and Golden Girls crossover comic, I might very well do it. And you know what? I might very well throw in a few other guest stars there just to make it a brilliant over the top candlelit supper.
Oh, it's so exciting. And on the royal duty with hand painted periwinkles, no less. Thank
Yeah.
everyone for tuning in to the beginning of our celebration of Magnus, who should be celebrated. We're going to have a
Yeah.
fabulous time with even more Everything is Gay, even the straight stuff. Tune in next time. Bye.
Farewell.